Many people with epilepsy have a difficult time keeping jobs. Employers often panic when they are confronted with a worker having a seizure. But if they go as far as firing the employee, in most cases, they're practicing discrimination. Too often, employers fire workers with epilepsy the first time they witness a seizure. Today, we'll find out how employees can deal with the problem. You're watching DNet, the Disability Network. I'm Susan Pettit.
And I'm Joe Coughlin. We'll also look at how renovations at a major hotel can turn an old, inaccessible building into one that welcomes disabled travelers.
And we'll see how sports fans who are blind can now join the growing number of people who collect football cards. But first, here's this week's roundup of disability news.
This week, in a day full of emotion and tears, Aboriginal people with disabilities laid their needs and concerns before members of Parliament. The natives and members of the Standing Committee on Human Rights and the Status of Disabled Persons came face to face in a school gymnasium on the Mohawk Reserve of Akwesasne near Cornwall, Ontario. The witnesses used personal stories to tell the committee what it is like to experience the double discrimination of being Native and disabled. Many of the witnesses told about the desperate lack of services, both on and off the reserves, for people with disabilities and caregivers. Charlotte King of the Mohawk Nation moved at least one MP to tears with her story about how her disabled 13-year-old son was treated in a white hospital.
If he had scrapes or bruises, they would say that it happened. It must have happened on a shift before. I didn't see it when I came on. So there are discrepancies that you can't prove. And the system is designed to protect these people. And you don't have the means to prove them. But because of the attitude that white people have about life, I don't think that Indian people are as well off as if they would be with their own, because they wouldn't ask you to give up your kids.
Disability Network is preparing documentary reports on the parliamentary hearings in Akwesasne and a conference of disabled Aboriginal people from across North America that coincided with the hearings.
A disabled woman in Quebec City has filed suit in court asking to be taken off life support. The case is a first in Canada because the woman, who has a degenerative disease, is fully conscious and mentally competent. The hospital treating her has refused to disconnect her respirator until a court decides on her case. Karen Gross reports.
Hotel Dieu Hospital has been home to Nancy for the past 2.5 years. She's 24 and she suffers from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a degenerative disease that has paralyzed her from her shoulders to her feet. She's only alive because a mechanical respirator breathes for her. Last spring, Nancy decided she didn't want to go on like this. She asked her doctor to disconnect her respirator, but fearing legal action, the doctor and the hospital refused. So Nancy tried starving herself, but went back to eating after 2 weeks because of intolerable stomach pains. Now she's asked the court to issue an injunction authorizing the hospital to remove the respirator.
Her life is hard, it's humiliating. She feels she loses dignity, and she doesn't have any hope anymore. And she just doesn't want to go on like this.
The case is the first of its kind in Canada. Doctors do disconnect the life support of people who are comatose or brain dead, but Nancy is fully conscious, incurable, but technically not terminally ill. The hospital is worried about provisions in the criminal code that outlaw euthanasia or assisting suicide. Specifically this one. It says, no person is entitled to consent to have death inflicted on him, and such consent does not affect the criminal responsibility of any person by whom death may be inflicted on the person by whom consent is given. But Anne Lapointe says Nancy's isn't a case of euthanasia.
To my position, it's a case of putting an end to an unwanted treatment.
And she argues that's legal according to the Quebec Civil Code. It says, no person may be made to undergo care of any nature, whether for examination, specimen taking, removal of tissue, or any other act, except with his consent. That article, say many experts in medical ethics, is key to Nancy's case.
So we're not talking about stopping her breathing. What we're talking about is whether she's got the right to refuse an artificial treatment that sustains her breathing. And the answer is yes, she does have the right to refuse that.
Most people who suffer from Guillain-Barré syndrome do recover after a few months. But specialists who've examined Nancy say she won't. Her nerves are damaged beyond repair. If her respirator is removed, they say she'll die within 3 minutes. Karen Gross, CBC News, Quebec City.
And that's this week's roundup of disability news. Coming up, discrimination in the workplace. Many people with disabilities who've been fired or laid off may be left with a nagging question. Did it have anything to do with my disability? Next, we'll look at a case in which that question was answered directly by the employer, and the answer was yes. Shefali Sajani has the story. Hello, Shefali.
Hello, Joe. Epilepsy is one of the least understood disabilities, and employers share in that general lack of knowledge. As a result, panic or fear often drives their actions when a worker has a seizure, with the result that the worker is fired. Earlier, I spoke with Diana Thistle and Martin Rapson about the situation. Diana Thistle is an employment consultant with the Epilepsy Association of Metro Toronto. Martin Rapson has epilepsy. He was fired from his job as a bartender after having a seizure. He took his case to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which concluded that he was a victim of discrimination. Rapson had been working at the bar for about 7 weeks when he had the seizure. Had you damaged anything? Had anybody been affected by your seizure?
No, I hadn't damaged anything except given myself a couple of bruises. I suppose that some people had been affected by it because I was told that I was being let go, and the reason was because I'm epileptic.
And they told you that?
They told me that.
Is this a common situation?
This is unfortunately very common. Every day I get a couple calls from someone I've never heard from before saying I've just been fired because I've had a seizure, or I'm being forced on sick leave because I've had a seizure and I'm not sick except for when I have the seizure. Or they're still working but they're facing harassment, or they're being told, look for another job. As soon as you find one, you're gone.
How did it make you feel when you realized that you were losing your job because you had epilepsy?
Well, it made me feel a mixed bag of emotions from angry to depressed. And that's in large part because this had happened to me before when I was much younger. And I was just very angry about the whole situation.
Do you think that it would have helped matters if they had known that you had epilepsy and had been prepared for the possibility of a seizure? Did you tell them?
No, I didn't tell them when I was hired. I didn't tell them because I mentioned to you previously I had been let go because I was epileptic previously. I was working behind a bar. I saw no reason to tell them. My seizures were under control, so that was another reason.
Ms. Thistle, is there ever a time when you should tell your employer that you have epilepsy?
Well, Marty wasn't required by law to tell the employer. The only time when you are required by law to disclose that you have a health condition is when it prevents you from doing an essential duty. And that doesn't mean just interrupt or interfere once in a while. You could have a cold and that might interfere. But when it prevents you from doing an essential duty, you must disclose that you cannot do that duty. And whether you disclose what the health condition is or not is still up to you. And it's really when it's a safety concern when you would decide to disclose, when it's too much risk to yourself, or when you may put somebody else at risk or property at risk, then you should let them know.
Having told your boss that you have epilepsy, is there anything that your boss is required to do for you?
It's usually teaching the people around you just to let a seizure happen, to deal with it properly as far as first aid, which is not major, and then to let the person go back to work.
Having gone through what you've gone through, Mr. Robson, what would you say to people who do face the kind of discrimination that you encountered?
I would say to them to definitely document everything that happens to them and take it to the Human Rights Commission as soon as possible and not to give up hope.
Do you have any sympathy at all for the position of employers who may feel nervous or fearful about having somebody with epilepsy in their workplace?
I can feel some sympathy for them feeling nervous, but I don't have any sympathy for someone not taking the time to learn about these things, to know the human rights law. So no.
The panic that takes place isn't really excusable. Employers cannot use that as a reason for not having a person there. I do have sympathy in that, yes, it may cause a bit of an incident, especially the first time. But if the person discloses that they have epilepsy, it's important that they explain what it is, what will happen, and all that the employer needs to do in order to keep that panic as little as possible when it first happens.
Diana Thistle, Marty Robson, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In Rapson's case, the Human Rights Commission found that the employer's action constituted straightforward discrimination and awarded him $3,000. Rapson is now working as a sales manager at a recycling company.
The rules governing employment practices are fairly similar across the country, but if you have specific questions about problems you face on the job, contact your provincial or regional epilepsy association.
As we mentioned last week, the Ontario government is planning to legislate employment equity next year. The announcement was made by Elaine Ziemba, Minister of Citizenship and Culture.
Both the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail responded with editorials objecting to the government's position. Here's part of what the Star had to say.
The proposal is a step in the right direction, but it ought not lead to rigid hiring quotas for women, natives, visible minorities, and the disabled. The province's discussion paper speaks of recruiting readily qualifiable workers, even when qualified white males are available. The principle of inclusion of marginalized peoples in the workplace cannot be based on the politics of exclusion.
And the Globe and Mail also criticized the concept of employment equity.
The government aims to permanently institutionalize race, sex, and disability as central to decisions on hiring and promotion. The fact is that employment equity is officially sanctioned discrimination.
We also asked you to call the DNet opinion line to let us know what you think. Here are some of your reactions. Julian from Toronto thought that the imposition of quotas is wrong.
What is wrong with the quota system is that the worker becomes the token Jew or the token black, Afro-Canadian, whatever, or the token disabled worker. And their fellow employees and unions have a tendency to view token workers as a mistake.
RKM, who has worked in broadcasting for 13 years and lives in Ottawa, had similar feelings about quotas.
I was used, I felt like a pawn because I had a disability. And when license renewal came up, that they mentioned that they had 4 people on staff that were disabled, and I felt like at times that I was used as a pawn.
But Robert Geary felt quotas were necessary. His call came from Toronto.
I think it should be mandatory because we have to make an employment too. We have to make a living too somehow.
And Thayer from Hamilton, Ontario, had this to say.
I believe that there should be mandatory hiring for companies on the stipulation that there are jobs in, I'll put it this way, there are jobs in the companies, all big companies, that are minor but have to be done. There should be an area set up, a warehouse or whatever, where physically disabled people could work. There are jobs that disabled people could do, but they couldn't be done in the work environment of the factory or place.
Another word of support for quotas came from Gregory Reeder of Golden, British Columbia.
And I'm in favor of the mandatory employment because
I am disabled with epilepsy, and I cannot get a job because of it. And I'm able-bodied, and just I have seizures every so often. Nobody will hire me because of it.
As we said, people feel strongly about the subject. Keep those calls coming. What do you think about employment equity? We'll give you the DNET opinion line number at the end of the program.
Coming up, an old and prominent, though not very accessible hotel takes a great leap forward. On past programs, we looked at modern hotel rooms, some accessible, others not. But there are many older hotels across the country, most built in an era when access was not a high priority. Now some of them are starting to recognize the need to provide accommodations and services for disabled travelers. The Royal York in Toronto is one of those. It stands front and center on the city's skyline. For travelers coming to Toronto, the Royal York Hotel has long been a dream come true, a model of style and elegance. But for people with disabilities, the dream has been more of a nightmare up until this January. This freight elevator was the only accessible entrance into the hotel, if you even knew it existed. Now, thanks to a multi-million-dollar renovation program, the hotel has many new features specifically designed for people with disabilities. I recently took a tour of the Royal York to look at the renovations with Brad Sherritt, a member of the DNET team. So, Brad, they spent about $100 million, I hear, on the renovation here.
They did. They really made this place turn it back into what it was, several years ago, one of the finest hotels in the country. And they've also now gone out of their way to make many of the rooms accessible. I think management said there were 23 rooms, and that's quite the number.
That's good. This is one of them, eh?
Yeah, this is one of our room right here. And,
nice wide door.
yeah, and the latch, of course, is very nice.
Well, a good latch handle on the door. Yeah.
Definitely, with anybody with any type of hand impairment is quite good.
Yeah.
And even the room here in the foyer is quite good. I mean, we have two large vehicles or wheelchair in your Mobi, and there's lots of room for us to turn around.
Yeah.
A lot of features of the thermostat here.
Yeah, right over here. Yeah.
Right over here is quite good. The knock light, which I think is quite interesting. Over
So
here.
if somebody knocks on the door, the light goes on, eh?
That's right.
That's wild. And we've got two different heights for the peepholes.
Which is good. And of course the light switches down
Light switches
below
over here, yeah.
are all in one.
What are the closets like?
Very good.
Excellent.
Quite good.
Yeah, because we got a bar down here that would be quite nice. You know, that's usually the biggest complaint that I have. If you're in one of these things, the closets, you know, all the
Are all at,
all that height for people that are standing up. But they got a bar down here specifically for people who are down at our level.
That's right. But if you are able to walk like I can, you don't necessarily want the closet at that level. You want it. So they've done a nice job.
Well, the nice thing about this room is that it's built for people who are walkies or wheelies.
That's right. Many different disabilities, not just wheelchair, which I think is standard in a lot of rooms.
Let's take a look at some of the other things.
Okay, sure.
First of all, they got a standard hotel telephone here.
That's right.
But they've got a little custom-made feature here. First of all, to house an amplifier.
That's right here, and it's relatively inexpensive yet incredibly practical.
Yeah, for somebody who's hard of hearing, it's a great little tool. Now, for somebody who's deaf, we've got a phone flasher. I've never seen one of these before.
Neither have I. I'd never seen one before, and again, it can't be that expensive.
Oh, it's real cheap, probably. And when the phone rings, that flashes. And another lifesaver for a person who's deaf is the TDD. Now, I understand they only have 2 units in a hotel room here?
What they have is, out of the 23 rooms that have accessible features, they only have 2 rooms set up with the TDD, but the management has told me that they do have more TDDs. So if anyone who's hard of hearing or deaf comes in and these 2 rooms are taken, then you just have to call management and they'll set you up.
Good. Let's go take a look at some more features.
Okay.
Well, I think one of the most unique features about this hotel is that if you're deaf and you want to watch TV like I do when I get into a hotel room, you can.
Yeah, it's really good, and they've got the nice remote control, very simple push button, and you turn her on, and like you said, you've got the decoder. I guess the only unfortunate thing is that there's still a lot of television programs that aren't closed captioned. So the hotel's gone out of its way to help people that need this service.
Now, Brett, I think they really put some thought into this hotel planning, because we got some safety features up here.
Yeah.
One is an audible fire alarm signal, and they've also got a visible one for people who are deaf.
Yeah, that's great. I've been in a lot of hotels in my days and never seen anything like that. The audible one always, but never the visual one.
The Royal York is not the only hotel that has undergone renovations recently. Many of the hotels in the Canadian Pacific chain have had a facelift. One of the pictures in this glossy brochure shows a banquet room at the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa. You can see the stairs, but no ramp. We called the hotel and they told us that they have portable ramps available.
If you've been to any of these or others, write to us. Tell us what you think. We'll give you our address at the end of the show.
Ahead on DNet, people who are blind can now join the ranks of sports fans who collect football cards. Here, Joe, I'll trade you 2 of these for one of those.
Well, yeah, sure, that sounds like a good deal to me. Now I got 3. All right.
Football fever is in the air at this time of year with the Grey Cup in Canada, and football, and more football on TV during the American Thanksgiving.
One hobby of many of the fans is collecting football cards. Up until recently, it's a hobby that excluded blind people. Mark Douglas has the story on how that's changing.
These students at Philadelphia's Overbrook School for the Blind are getting in touch with some of their favorite football superstars.
Barry Sanders. Derek. Thomas.
For scores of blind sports fans, a new series of action-packed NFL Braille cards is helping to bring players like the Philadelphia Eagles' Randall Cunningham to life.
I feel very honored to be featured as part of the action-packed Braille series and the other cards also. The Braille cards are wonderful because they're already embossed as it is, action-packed, so it's a raised card where they can touch and they can feel.
It feels like he has a football in his hand, and he's wearing his helmet and everything, and he's running.
The new Braille cards are a great addition to the full action-packed NFL card set because they offer blind football fans a unique way to enjoy the excitement of the NFL season.
Yeah, you collect them.
In addition to Cunningham, who led the NFC in touchdown passes, this year's lineup features other 1990 NFL leaders, including the Kansas City Chiefs' Derek Thomas, the Detroit Lions' Barry Sanders, from the Buffalo Bills' Thurman Thomas, the Houston Oilers' Warren Moon and Haywood Jeffries, and from the San Francisco 49ers, Charles Haley and Jerry Rice. Action poses of each player are engraved into embossing dies, Braille symbols identifying each player and his respective 1990 statistical accomplishment are meticulously etched into each plate. The plates are then assembled into templates, which produce high-quality embossed reproductions.
Currently, only 8 NFL players are featured in Braille cards, but the selection should be expanded in time for next season. There are no CFL cards available in Braille.
And that's our show for this week. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. See you again next week. And let us know your views about employment equity. Call the DNet Opinion Line at 416-921-7933. That's 416-921-7933.
Here's our address. The Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station 8, Toronto, M5W1E6. That's Disability Network, CBC, Toronto, M5W1E6. Our fax number is area code 416-975-5636.